In a quiet Alabama town, a hearse sat parked outside a funeral home. But inside wasn't a body prepared for burial. It was a baby, still strapped in her car seat, still dressed in her little pink onesie. And her mother? Nowhere to be found. For days, nobody could answer the question that tore through the community. Why was a living, breathing child taken to a funeral home? And why did she never make it out alive? This is one of the most disturbing cases we've ever covered, and you're watching Dark Case Files. Make sure you subscribe, because once you hear the details, you're going to want to know what happens next. It was the kind of heat that made the air feel thick, the kind of heat that clung to your skin and slowed your breathing. August in Gadsden, Alabama. On a quiet stretch of road, outside a small-town funeral home, a black hearse sat baking in the sun. The polished chrome glinted like a mirror, but no one was looking at the outside, because what was inside would shake this entire community to its core. The call to 911 came just after noon. A passerby, curious about the unmoving vehicle, had stepped closer, and that's when they saw it. A baby alone, strapped in a car seat, motionless. Emergency crews rushed to the scene. The hearse belonged to Self's funeral home, a small, family-run business known for decades of serving this community. But this was no funeral procession. This was a crime scene. The infant, just weeks old, was rushed to the hospital. Doctors worked frantically, but it was too late. The baby had been in that sweltering hearse for hours. Police immediately began looking for the driver, and the trail led them to 37-year-old Amanda Self. According to investigators, Amanda had been seen driving the hearse earlier that morning, running what she later described as errands for the funeral home. But when officers found her, hours later, she didn't seem shocked or panicked. Witnesses would later tell police she appeared calm, too calm. When asked why the baby was in the hearse, Amanda reportedly gave an answer that investigators called vague and inconsistent. She said she was helping out and had left the vehicle briefly, but couldn't explain where she had gone or why she never returned. Detectives took Amanda into custody. As news broke, the small town of Gadsden erupted in disbelief. People here knew Amanda, or thought they did. She'd grown up in the area, was known to have family ties to the funeral home, and had no public history of violence. But this was something else. While the public processed the shock, investigators were already peeling back layers. And what they found made this case far more complicated than anyone imagined. Phone records showed Amanda had been in contact with multiple members of her extended family in the hours leading up to the discovery. And then came the first real twist. Police learned that Amanda's relatives were not just connected to the funeral home, but also to a separate property miles away. A property that, within hours, would become the scene of a crime even more horrific than what was found in the hearse. The property was an old single-story home sitting on the outskirts of town, its white paint chipped and curling in the Alabama sun. The front yard was overgrown, and the mailbox leaned just slightly, as if weighed down by years of neglect. Investigators arrived quietly, without sirens, but the moment they stepped inside, the air seemed to change. What they saw in those first few seconds would follow them for the rest of their careers. According to police, 3 adults were found dead in separate rooms. Each victim showed signs of severe trauma. There were no signs of forced entry, no ransacked drawers, no broken glass. It was as if someone they trusted had walked right in. The victims were later identified as close relatives of Amanda Self. Their names withheld in early reports while the coroner worked to notify extended family. The connection between the Hearse discovery and these killings wasn't immediately clear, but investigators say it quickly became impossible to separate the two. In one of the back bedrooms, officers found something that made them stop in their tracks: baby clothes neatly folded on the bed next to an empty bassinet. No one could say for sure if those clothes belonged to the infant found in the hearse, but it was enough for detectives to treat the scenes as linked. The timeline became the critical puzzle piece. Authorities believe the killings happened before the baby was left in the hearse, possibly in the early hours of the morning. But here's what made the case stranger. Neighbors told police they hadn't heard a single scream, a single bang, nothing. In fact, one neighbor claimed they saw Amanda's car in the driveway just after sunrise, but by 8 a.m., it was gone. Surveillance footage from a nearby gas station would later place the hearse in motion less than an hour after that sighting. While forensic teams worked inside the house, state investigators interviewed Amanda in custody. According to officials, she didn't deny being at the home, but her story changed multiple times. At one point, she said she'd gone there to check on family. At another, she insisted she hadn't been inside at all. Detectives describe her demeanor as unmoved, even when told her relatives were dead. By nightfall, word had spread. Gadsden wasn't dealing with one tragedy. This was a quadruple homicide investigation, and the suspect was already behind bars. But if police thought Amanda's self was going to make this easy, they were wrong. Because when prosecutors tried to piece together a motive, they ran into an even bigger problem. Nothing about this crime made sense. No disputes, no large sums of money, no history of domestic blow-ups. And yet, 4 lives were gone. In most murder cases, investigators cling to motive like a lifeline. Money, revenge, jealousy, something that makes the crime make sense. But in this case, every lead seemed to evaporate the moment detectives got close. They combed through the victim's finances, no mysterious withdrawals, no sudden debts, no hidden assets. They searched for family disputes, nothing more serious than a few disagreements over holiday dinners. And yet, 4 people were dead, and a baby had been left abandoned. As the district attorney's office prepared to file formal charges, they hit another wall. The physical evidence didn't tell the whole story. Yes, Amanda's fingerprints were found in the home, but that alone wasn't damning. She was family. She'd been there before. The murder weapon? Police never released specifics, only calling it a blunt object. It had no usable prints. And perhaps most baffling, there were no defensive wounds on Amanda. If she had attacked 4 people, one after the other, how had no one fought back hard enough to leave a mark? This was a detail that gnawed at the lead detective, who privately told reporters off the record that the crime looked almost staged. But staged by who? And why? Meanwhile, the town of Gadsden was boiling over with questions. Social media lit up with theories. Some believed Amanda was protecting someone else. Others thought she might have snapped under pressure, though no one could point to any history of violence. A local pastor even went on record saying, "This doesn't feel like the Amanda I knew." Prosecutors pressed forward anyway, knowing that even without a clear motive, the sheer brutality of the crime and the timeline linking her to the house would weigh heavily in court. But as trial preparations began, a new and disturbing twist emerged. Surveillance footage, the same that caught the hearse in motion, showed a second vehicle following behind it for several blocks before vanishing off camera. Investigators couldn't make out the license plate, but the make and model? A dark-colored SUV, one that neighbors claimed they'd seen parked outside the victim's home just days earlier. If that SUV's driver had nothing to do with the killings, why did they vanish the same morning the bodies were discovered? And if they did, then maybe Amanda's self wasn't the only one with answers. By the time jury selection began, the mysterious dark SUV had already become a ghost in the investigation. No official updates, no mention in court filings, no explanation for why it wasn't being publicly pursued. It was as if that lead had been quietly buried. Prosecutors stuck to their narrative. Amanda was guilty. She'd been found near the scene. Her timeline was inconsistent. The abandoned baby was proof of a desperate, irrational state of mind. But outside the courtroom, doubts kept growing. One reporter, digging through phone records, noticed that a number linked to Amanda had exchanged over a dozen short calls in the week leading up to the murders, with someone who had since left town entirely. That person's name was never revealed, at least not in public records. Inside the courtroom, the prosecution painted Amanda as cold and calculated, while the defense leaned hard on the gaps in the state's case: the lack of motive, the missing weapon, and the unexplained SUV. The trial dragged on for weeks, each day filled with whispers and theories in the gallery. But the real shock came on a rainy Thursday afternoon, just as the defense was preparing to rest its case. A court clerk rushed in with a sealed envelope, delivered anonymously to the courthouse mailroom. Inside was a USB drive. On it, grainy footage from what appeared to be a home security camera. It showed the victim's front porch, time-stamped less than an hour before police believe the murders happened. The footage clearly captured someone walking up to the house. It wasn't Amanda. The figure was wearing a hood, face obscured, but their build, their walk, noticeably different. And then, the faint reflection of a dark SUV parked at the curb. Court was adjourned early that day, and the judge ordered the evidence to be reviewed in private chambers. For the first time since her arrest, Amanda's eyes lit up with something that looked a lot like hope. But here's the thing. The footage never made it into public record. To this day, no one knows why. Some say the file got lost in the court system. Others believe it was intentionally suppressed. What's certain is that within 48 hours, the trial took a sudden and unexpected turn. One that would leave the jury stunned, the public divided, and the truth about what happened in that house on that cold morning still buried under layers of secrets. The trial took a sudden and dramatic turn just weeks after the mysterious footage surfaced, footage that the public would never officially see. August 2025 had barely passed its halfway mark, yet the courtroom drama in Gadsden was intensifying like never before. The anonymous USB, the hooded figure, and that dark SUV had thrown the entire case into question. Prosecutors were forced to acknowledge that their timeline might not be as airtight as they claimed. Defense attorneys pounced on this uncertainty, arguing their client, Amanda's self, might be the victim of a larger, more sinister conspiracy. Outside the courthouse, whispers grew louder. Some community members questioned whether Amanda had been set up to take the fall for crimes she didn't commit. Others wondered if the missing SUV and that unknown figure pointed to someone still at large, walking free in their town. Meanwhile, Amanda's legal team uncovered troubling gaps in the investigation. Several key pieces of evidence, including some forensic reports, were either missing or had been delayed without clear explanation. Requests for information about the mysterious SUV's owner came up empty, and witnesses who might have had critical information seemed reluctant to come forward or had vanished altogether. At the same time, Amanda's family members and supporters organized vigils and rallies, demanding justice not just for the victims, but for Amanda herself. They claimed she was a scapegoat, caught in a web spun by others with secrets to hide. Yet, in the courtroom, the prosecution continued to press forward, painting Amanda's inconsistent statements and presence near the crime scenes as proof enough of guilt. But with so many unanswered questions, the jury's verdict was far from certain. When the day finally came for the jury to deliver its decision, the courtroom was packed with anxious faces. Family, friends, reporters, and townspeople all waiting for the truth to finally be revealed. And as the foreperson stood to read the verdict, the air thickened with tension. But that moment, the climax of years of investigation, the culmination of tragedy and heartbreak, would not be the end. Instead, it marked the beginning of a deeper mystery that continues to haunt Gadsden and the families involved. Because no matter what the verdict was, the question remained. Who was the shadow lurking in the dark? Who was driving that SUV? And why did a baby end up abandoned in a hearse? If this story has left you with more questions than answers, you're not alone. Dark Case Files will keep digging, bringing you every twist, every secret, and every shadow hiding in the truth. Make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an update. Because sometimes the most chilling stories are the ones still waiting to be told.